Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and talk about, I guess, the first iPod Touch that I'm going to be talking about this year, which is the iPod Touch 7th generation. Now what I can tell you about this specific iPod was that, first of all, it's kind of legendary in a way that it's probably the last iPod Touch we're ever going to see. Now there could be a chance where we're going to be seeing the iPod Touch 8th generation, but the chances of that are slimmer than even seeing a 7th generation iPad in my opinion. Now if you want to pick one of these things up, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now one of the bigger reasons why I think the iPod Touch 7th generation is really worth it, and any reason in 2021, is really if you're trying to give something to your child or to a young person or to somebody who doesn't deserve a phone or something like that, I don't know. Or if you're trying to use a device as a secondary device in case you don't want to use your phone. Those are really the two cases where I would see somebody, wanting to buy a 7th generation iPod Touch. I think other than that, for what this thing is going for in the brand new market, it's really not worth it, because you can buy a used iPhone like an iPhone 8 or iPhone, 8 Plus or something for not necessarily the same price as this, but fairly close, within like a $50 to $100 range. So it doesn't really make much sense to buy this thing in that sense. But for a developer or for somebody else, like I mentioned, who doesn't want to use an iPhone, this is technically one of the cheapest ways of buying a device that's getting iOS support. So that's a pretty big thing to keep in mind. I know a ton of developers who bought iPod Touches, or have heard of developers who bought iPod Touches, because it is the cheapest way of them testing apps on these specific iOS devices. Now, one downside of that is that it doesn't have, the latest design. So things like the iPhone 12 with the gesture-based design, this thing still has a home button, but it still gets you like 90% there in my opinion. And I think that is one reason why the iPod Touch 7th generation is completely worth it. Now speaking about that display, it does have that 4-inch panel on the front. So it's a pretty small panel compared to this day and age. It is pretty much the exact same thing that we have on the iPhone 5S. So again, not a ginormously small panel, but not a, hugely small big panel either. I think the panel is okay for the most part. You have the front-facing camera, no Touch ID, just that home button. On the bottom, a lightning port, and I can tell you right now, I always forget how slim the iPod Touches are. These things are some of the slimmest devices I've ever seen, and they are so beautiful. I wish phones could be like this without giving up battery life, because if that's the case, then that would be awesome. And on the back, you have the standard aluminum back, which still feels extremely premium, and that single camera setup as well. So the feeling of the iPod Touch, it still feels like a very good iPod. It doesn't feel cheap. It doesn't feel bad. And for pretty much like an entertainment / MP3 device, it is a very good device in terms of a feeling in the hand. Now, of course, it's probably very small for a lot of people out there compared to now, which we have phones that are just increasing in size year after year. But I really do think it's not even that bad of a panel. I don't think it looks ugly. I still think it actually looks pretty good for the most part. So in terms of the outside, I would still say it looks pretty relevant in this day and age. Now those cameras, I guess we have to hit on them even though it's nothing super crazy. This thing on the back has an 8 megapixel sensor, and I don't think you can do anything super crazy with it. But I think for the most part, for people out there, if you're wanting to go ahead and use a camera for FaceTime calls or for Google Meets or something like that, I guess this thing can do it for the most part. You can shoot 1080p videos on the back at 30 and 60 frames per second, which is pretty good. On the front, you have a 1.2 megapixel sensor, and you can do 720p videos on that. And I do think for the most part, having an iPod like this, I think is good enough for a lot of people. I really don't think people need a crazy amount of camera in order to do basic things. But if you're somebody who wants to, film YouTube videos on your device or whatever, you're definitely not going to be getting like the best lens ever. You're going to be getting something similar to about an iPhone 6 that is about the same camera that you're getting on this thing. And the iPhone 6 came out in 2014. So keep that in mind. It's definitely not the latest camera, but it really just depends on what you're going to do with it. I think the front camera also is like pretty bad, but again, it just depends. If you're just doing FaceTime calls, it's really not that big of a deal because the FaceTime calls get compressed no matter what, megapixel count you have. And I think for the most part, for everyone out there, it's an okay camera. It's not the best thing ever. It's not the worst thing ever either for the price tag. And I think if you're somebody who wants to use a camera, this thing is just an iOS device with an added benefit of having a camera. It's not a great one, but it gets the job done in my opinion. So in terms of that pretty much covers it up. Now hitting on the software and the battery life, these two things aren't necessarily like the best things about this device, but I think the software is actually one of the best reasons to pick this thing up. So first of all, it started off with iOS 12, I believe. It has the same chipset as the iPhone 7. So pretty much as many updates as that device is going to get, that's many updates this device is going to get. So that's a pretty big thing to keep in mind. So in my opinion, from what I've seen, I am pretty sure this device is going to last up until iOS 15. I think the end of iOS 15, That's when this device is going to be done. I don't think it's going to be getting any more updates after that, to be completely honest. Is that a crazy big deal? I really don't think so. I really don't think that's like a groundbreaking achievement. I think it's pretty much okay. And I think it's, if you're going to get an iPod Touch, you're expecting this thing not to be lasting that long. So if you get it now, if you get it next year, just know iOS 15, I think, is probably the last update it's going to be getting. But with the battery life, this is another area that I'm not really happy about. I mean, it doesn't have a big size battery. It's a thin device, so it's already pretty much guaranteed not having a big size battery anyway. So the battery life's not going to be that great. And the software, iOS 14, they take a hit on a lot of these older devices. I think specifically with those devices though, with the Apple A10 Fusion chip, it really didn't do that bad. So I think that's a pretty good thing about it. But I think for all intents and other purposes, this device for the most part is great in the software department. I don't know how many, many more software updates it's getting, like I mentioned, but I still think it's okay for the most part. I just kind of do wish this thing maybe had a little bit of a bigger battery without increasing the thickness of it like a crazy amount. But other than that, I think that pretty much covers up the whole entire software and battery life segment. Now, ending it off with the performance, this device does actually have the Apple A10 Fusion chip inside of it, like I mentioned, and that's a pretty cool thing for this device to have. It has a great performance for the most part. It's not going to be a slow phone. It's not going to be the greatest, fastest phone ever either, but for a majority of people out there, it's going to get the job done. This device, like I mentioned, pretty much has the same specifications internally as something like an iPhone 7. So whatever you're going to be able to do on an iPhone 7, you're pretty much going to be able to do on your iPod Touch 7th generation. And I think that's a really good thing. If you're somebody who wants to just play a bunch of games and kind of go in that direction, just know that this iPod Touch is probably going to be able to do those things, but do keep in mind that it's not going to be like the greatest, fastest thing ever, you know what I mean? So if you're trying to play games like Fortnite or whatever, well, you can't really play those things anymore, but if you're trying to play like Real Racing 3 or any other game for that matter, PUBG, whatever other games are supported, you're pretty much going to be getting a pretty okay experience. I think for the price tag, it's pretty good actually, but it's a smaller display, so there's not a lot of pixels to push, and you have an Apple A10 Fusion chip, which is still a pretty good chipset inside of it. So you're really not sacrificing anything when it comes down to that. Now, there are some other areas that I wish kind of improved on. I think the RAM is one thing that's kind of getting into the, space where that's something that we want to see improved. But I really do think because of the price tag and because this thing being so cheap, we're not expecting this thing to be an insanely great device in terms of performance. We're expecting this thing to be good enough for people to go play games on and people to play music on and watch videos. If you're trying to go and do some crazy things on it, just keep in mind at that back of your head that this is an iPhone 7 and an iPod Touch body. That's the best way I can put it. And if you have that kind of thought process, it kind of makes it feel like that much better of a device in my opinion. So in terms of performance, that pretty much covers it up. Now to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, should you go and buy an iPod Touch 7th generation in 2021? Well, this is pretty much what I'll tell you. I think the iPod Touch 7th generation is really only worth it in one area. And as I mentioned before, that's really if you don't want to use an iPhone, then you can have the Apple ecosystem by using an iPod Touch. And that's really the only reason. I mean, that encompasses a lot of things. That encompasses, if you want to go ahead and give this to your young kid or young person or whatever, or an old person, whoever doesn't want to use an iPhone, you can go ahead and give it to them. If you're a developer and you want to start developing iPhone apps, well, getting an iPod Touch 7th generation is one of the cheapest ways that you can go ahead and get into the Apple ecosystem and, test your apps out to those devices. Now, there are cheaper ways to do it. As I mentioned before, you can go and buy an iPhone 7 for cheaper than what this thing is selling for in the brand new market. So I think that's another pretty big thing, and I think you're going to have more functionality from an iPhone 7, but there's still a lot of similarities. This device is still going to be updated for at least another year or so, probably even more than that. You're still getting pretty smooth performance, and it's a really good feeling device. It doesn't feel cheap. But as I mentioned before, you'll probably be better off if you purchase something like an iPhone 8, like an iPhone 10. That's a little bit more money, but something like an iPhone 8, that's going to be giving you a better experience overall than the iPod Touch 7th generation. Now, I understand this thing's brand new and everything, but I think that's probably what I would recommend to a majority of people out there. So that really pretty much covers it up. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.